Welcome to the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter. This is our study group for September 26, 2024. This is our 137th study group. We're pretty happy about that. Tonight, we're going to be talking about slicing and dicing, mastering the art of splitting user stories, and RachaelWilterdink is going to be our guest for that. My name is Thea Soren. I'm the president of the IIBA Tampa Bay chapter. I'm also the vice president of career and professional development. I'm the founder of the BA Force Multiplier Movement, one of the authors of the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge, and one of the authors of Business Analysis, Bridging the Gap Between Industries. All that means is I'm here for you. If you have something that you need, please reach out to me. I prefer you to use LinkedIn, but reach out to me. I don't care if you're here live, watching a recording, or anything else. My job is to help you. We like to celebrate our wins. These are the folks that have reached out to us that said because of our chapter, because of the efforts we've gone to, they were better able to pass their certifications. Those in red went on to be leadership in other chapters. Those in green have been or are leaders in our chapter. And then the one on bottom, Promise, recently contacted us. He has not only just passed his CBAP, but he's also going to be presenting for us on October 10th. This is our board. We are a group of people that just want to make the world a better place for business analysis. You see that there are 3 people on there that aren't real people. We want you. If you want to be a board member, I don't care where in the world you live. All you have to do is be an IIBA member and be a member of our chapter, and we'll put you on the board and we'll give you some work that fits your needs and fits your time availability and helps make us the better place. So reach out to me again on LinkedIn. I told you we have members from all over the world. It's literally true. These are members of our chapter. If you do not have an IIBA chapter, we can be your chapter if we are the ones that can serve you best. If you live in a place that is close to a chapter and they have in-person meetings, that might be a better chapter for you. But if you don't have that, feel free to join us and let me know. We've given you several ways to reach out to us. This is our normal 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern study group for every Thursday night. We have this throughout the year except Thanksgiving through the end of the year. We take that time off to help to work with our families. We've given you meeting recordings. I'm going to show you the index to that in just a minute on Bob's Incredible Index. We've also given you our chapter website. I'm going to show you that in just a minute as well. So you have a lot of ways to reach out to us. These are our study group advisors, Bob Churchill and Esther. Bob has his website down there, RP Churchill. I'm going to show that to you on the screen in just a minute. It's important for a lot of reasons, but one of the things I want you to know about it is it's the index to all of our YouTube recordings by topic. Bob has done an immense amount of work on that, and it's very beneficial. If you live anywhere in Florida, if you want to have in-person meetings, reach out to me. I'm going to organize in-person meetings. I've been talking about this for about 2 months, and I haven't gotten anybody that's reached out to me yet. However, I figure I'm going to try this through the end of the year and try to create something in Orlando or Pensacola or Naples or wherever you are. There is a group in Miami that meets, and if you are close to them, they would be better for you. But everywhere else, I'm trying to get you together, and if you want a leadership position in that, we can make you the director of the chapter branch. We want to help the emerging professionals. We want to help people that are in college be able to graduate college and be already a member of a professional organization of business analysts. We want to try to facilitate you having a professional certification whenever you leave college. That's going to put you head and shoulders above everyone else that's going out for jobs. So reach out to our Director of Emerging Professionals, Kennedy Davis. We have partnered with other associations, other IIBA chapters. I'm teaching for the Ireland chapter and the Philippines chapter about a 20-week series. I'm also working with the Bluegrass IIBA chapter. The Tampa Bay Product Group is for product owners in Tampa Bay for Agile, and the Women in Agile out of Tampa is one of our partners. We're going to be partnering with them with a combined meeting very soon. Watermark Learning has given us a discount code on all of their products, which includes business analysis, project management, a couple of other things. They've given us 40% off. So use that discount code if you want the discount.
That's a killer deal. That's who I took my boot camp through.
They've got
Yeah.
awesome cards and we use their practice test questions.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Adaptive US has also given us a discount code of 20% off of all of their products, live classes, and on-demand courses, excluding the IIBA exam vouchers. That would cut into them, so they'd be having to pay for us to go through it. We work on all 7 certifications. The top 3 are with the business analysis body of knowledge. The bottom 3 are specialty certifications. If you want any information on the Agile, data analytics, cybersecurity, product ownership, or any of those for business analysts, reach out to me. I'll be glad to walk you through it. Tonight, we have the pleasure of Rachel joining us. She has over 25 years of IT experience. She has so many certifications. She didn't even put them all in here. But tonight we're going to talk about slicing and dicing user stories, and I'll let her talk about more of that in just a minute. Next week, on October 3rd, we have a co-meeting with the Tampa Women in Agile and the product group. We are going to do a lean coffee and lightning talks. We're going to talk about the basics of Agile, and then we're going to talk about anything that you bring that we vote up. And if you've never done lean coffee, this is your opportunity to experience it. And if you are interested in Agile or just talking about it or have questions, come and talk with us. The week after that, on October 10th, Promise is going to come back and he's going to be talking about exploring Salesforce as a business analyst. He's given this talk several times in the UK and he's happy to talk to us about it. This is the gentleman I told you, because of our chapter, he's been able to get his CBAP. So come and support him and learn more about business analysis using Salesforce. David is going to be talking to us on October 17th, Influencing Without Authority, because, you know, as business analysts, we have a lot of information. We have no direct reports, but he has some key strategies for us. He has created a fantastic organization in the UK, and he's got a lot of really important things that will help you in your toolbox. On the 24th, Tom Hendrickson is going to come and talk about the care and feeding of developers. He has been a developer for a very long time, and he knows what he needs from the business analysts and what he can provide for the business analysts. So we're going to work on developing the technology and tools for talking with developers. Just a few more. October 31st, Felicia Joyner is going to talk about Techie Visions, Crafting Your Future in the Digital World. She joined us last week with a raffle, and she has a lot of important things to say about being techie in our corporate America. We don't talk about it very much. We used to call ourselves geeks or nerds. Yes, we are, but we're good at it. So let's do it together. And then Pam Patterson is going to talk about ensuring your stakeholders provide you valuable contributions at the right time, not hijacking your meetings, while maintaining the focus and momentum of your project. So whenever she first told me that, I was like, you mean you don't want them to talk? And she's like, I want them to talk at the right times. So she's got some management techniques that she wants to share with us. And we are almost finished. Last one, November 14th is the last meeting of the year. This is whenever our board is going to come and talk about the things we got to talk about. We got to do this once a year. We're going to talk about our budget. We're going to talk about what we've accomplished this year, what we plan next year. I'm already booking into April. So there are a lot of things that we're planning, but we want to know what you want us to do next year. The very first meeting next year, we're going to have recruiters come in from one of our partner companies to talk about what's the current market, what skills are they seeing on the horizon that we need to develop, what do they need from us as business analysts to get us in the roles that we want. And I'm looking forward to that. Okay, let me switch screens here. Can you see the IIBA website? Okay, this is our website. Our calendar is on it. Everything is on it. This is TampaBayIIBA.org. Big shout out to Alicia and Esther who have created this, transferred us to the new platform. They deserve all the credit for this. But you get all the information from this. So I don't want you to miss this at all. This is Bob Churchill's website. He's got an awesome blog that he's put out every single thing we can think of on it. But he's also got the IIBA study group. This is your basic information for our organization. And then again, at the very bottom is all of the people that have come to talk to us, our guest speaker series. Above that is every single technique in the BABOK, a blog and 2 videos. And above that are the practice test study questions for the CBAP by knowledge area. Above that is every single thing else that we've ever talked about, so you can go in and find it. But Bob has put in an immense amount of work, and he continues to do that on a weekly basis. Okay, this is Rachel's website. She not only has put out things, so many good things. I want to tell you that her writing, and I'm choosing this word intentionally, her writing is effervescent and informative. It is a delight to read what she writes, guys. I encourage you to go out and check it out. I'm going to turn the speaking and the screen over to Rachel now and let her talk to us about splitting user stories.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right. I shall share and we'll get started. There is a ton to cover. All right. Ooh, can you guys see my screen?
We can.
All right, good, because I can sort of see you guys at the bottom. Hopefully you're not seeing yourselves. Are you guys seeing the bar with your pictures? Hopefully
No.
not. Okay,
And
fantastic.
I'll monitor chat if in case there's any questions. Do you want questions at the end or during?
Either way would work. Doesn't matter to me.
Okay, very good.
All right, get right to it. Assuming I can get control of my, oh, I gotta look at my, I gotta minimize this. Sorry, 1 second. I'm only on one screen because I'm not in my normal location, so it's gonna be a little weird for me.
Okay.
Hold on. I gotta try this again. Ah,
Presenting at KC
yes. Come on, Zoom. I want to share that. I'll just share the whole screen.
If you want to share that, that's fine. We can live
Nope,
with it.
I can do it. I got it.
Okay, good.
Are we good now? Can you see it?
You're very good.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so you saw a little bit about me. Yep, I have lots of certifications, Agile, business analysis, product ownership. I did start my IT career at Netflix, so that's my little claim to fame back when it was a startup. And then I was more like a front-end web publisher and then transitioned to business analysis in 2005. So I'm coming up on 20 years, which is crazy as a business analyst. And yes, I always have to blame my husband for my last name because it's an odd one. And if it's a link, a dink, a sink, or a tink, they're usually Dutch and they come from Oosburg or Hingham, Wisconsin, but it's spelled Hingham, so that's how I say it. All right, so diving right in, we're going to talk a little bit first about what user stories are for anybody who might not be familiar. And then we are going to cover, I believe it's actually 27 different ways to approach splitting user stories. All right, so what is a user story? What makes a good user story? What are bad ones? What's the slicing the cake concept and why split user stories? So I hope most of you are probably already familiar with this technique. It's pretty common if you're in an agile environment. If you're not in an agile environment, might not be too familiar, but basically it's a way of expressing a requirement from a user's perspective. So it usually follows a similar format to this. So as some kind of user, I want something so I can accomplish some sort of goal. So throughout this presentation, I use a fictional, not a real app, but a recipe app. So those are the examples I'm going to pull from. I think it's something relatable to most people. Previous trainings I've done with my prior company, we used a beer app, but I didn't think that would be appropriate for myself. So I don't even like beer. But anywho, There's just an example there of a very simple, as a baker, I want to search my cookie recipes so I can figure out what cookies I want to make for my kids today, even though they're mostly grown and gone now and I don't cook that much anymore. So hopefully you guys have also heard this acronym INVEST. So it's basically a reminder of what makes for a good user story. So ideally it's independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, testable. I won't get into details on that, but you can look that up. That was a term coined by a guy named Bill Wake. Bad user stories. So some people will refer to this as user story smells. Bad user stories are usually, they're at the wrong level of detail. They're either too big or too small. They violate any of those prior invest criteria. They're written from the wrong perspective. So for example, as a developer, I want something that nothing makes my head want to explode more than I hear a developer story from his perspective. That's not okay with me. It's got to be from our users. You might have missing or poor acceptance criteria and they're sliced the wrong way. So slicing of the cake is super important. I always point this out as like, if you take nothing away from my presentation, I always want people to remember that you want to slice your stories vertically, not horizontally. And what I mean by that is, if you take a look at this picture, this is a system layer split, that's horizontal layers, and then in an agile context, you take a small vertical thin slice through all the layers so you get a fully piece of working functional software at the end of each iteration.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Do you consider horizontal versus vertical slicing, doing one, not doing the other, as wholly written or just a guideline?
I would say it's a better practice. I did spend the early part of my business analysis career in a more traditional software development life cycle, and I can just tell you from personal experience, it's usually not a good way to go because you end up basically not delivering any value until the very end. You can't put it all together and get something useful until you've completed all those horizontal layers in a sequential fashion. But if you're taking that thin vertical slice and going all the way through it, you're going to get small incremental delivery of value. So I wouldn't say it's always like a hard and fast rule. Sometimes you don't have any choice. There are circumstances where it makes sense maybe that you have to stand something up before you can take that approach, but as just a general rule, I try to avoid it as much as possible. So that's a really good question. All right, moving on. Why we split user stories? I think the bottom line for the most part is that they're generally too large. And there's a lot of argument and debate amongst agile practitioners about what you call those, or be it epics or themes or features. Usually just means they're too large to be completed within a sprint or an iteration. So the point of splitting a user story is to make it right size. So you're thinking Goldilocks. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's just right, just the right size to be completed within an iteration. It also helps you get to market more quickly with valuable features. And also, ideally, you're getting rid of things that don't really add value. So if you look at a story and you split it out, you might find things that, yeah, we really don't need to do that. And so you can drop it from your backlog and not spend time on something nobody really wants or needs.
Right.
All right.
Rich,
So,
yeah.
Pardon?
Yes.
Pardon, I have a quick question. You said that you don't like when developers or one of your stakeholders provide a user story from their own perspective. My question was specifically, how are they supposed to gather that information without it being from their perspective? In a sense, like how should they go about that process? I'm just wondering if you could.
That's a good question. So for the most part, all of your user stories should be coming from an end user perspective. So who's actually going to be using this software or your solution, whatever it might be. And usually it's not the person building it. Although every now and then there are circumstances where I can see the need to have a technical story. I call them technical stories that are from a developer perspective, but those should be very rare and few and far between. And even when I see one like that, where it's coming from the developer perspective, I always challenge them to couch it in the form of a user story from a user perspective. So find a way somehow to turn it around, flip it, see it from a different perspective so that it's coming at it from a user perspective. Because that way it's defining something of value to that user. Otherwise, if it's just a purely technical story, I don't think your users care. They really don't care. So then I would question as a product owner, why are they even doing it? Another really good question. All right, moving into part 2, common user story splitting methods. So there are a lot. These are the 15, I would say, really most common ways of splitting stories. I'm going to go pretty quickly here. Feel free to jump in if you do have questions. And you'll notice as I go through that a lot of times, some of these are going to be very similar to one another. Sometimes they might overlap in a certain way. And so there's just very slight nuances between some of them. I wouldn't get, hung up on what they're called, just finding the best ways to do the splits. So first one up here is by the user role. So I'm hoping you've all seen or used a roles and permissions matrix in your past. But basically, this is a really good way to, I think, pretty logically sort of spell out like who can do what within a system. So in this really simple example, I've got, we've got both internal users, external users of my fake app, and then we've got all the things that they can do along the other side of the grid there. And then you can see certain users can do certain kinds of things. So in this example, I'd be like, here's an example. As a food lover, I want to be able to see, or I want to be able to view recipes so I can see what recipes are available. But then if you were to look at this from another perspective, you could write it from that other user's perspective. So that's an interesting way to approach it. Another one is capabilities and user goals. So, what is it they want to be able to do? That just give me a sentence. What is it you want to be able to do in this app? And then what's the reason you want to do it? It's a little bit similar to a user story itself, but this is just a kind of different way to approach it. Like, what are the capabilities that you need to have available? And then you can take these and split them out in, even further, flesh them out into more details, all the things you need to make it a full and whole user story. All right, who doesn't love a good swim lane diagram? I think this was one of the earliest techniques I learned as a business analyst, and I still love a good swim lane diagram. So workflow steps is a really another good way to approach splitting your stories. And again, you can see in a way it's similar to the previous one with the roles, right? So each of the horizontal swim lanes is a person, right? A type of user role. So in this example, we've got two stories there. So as a food lover, I want to submit my recipe so it will be considered for publication. And then the next step in the workflow process is that an editor receives it. So again, a different role. As the editor, I want to be able to review a submitted recipe so I can decide whether to approve it for publishing, right? So again, there's a lot of ties, a lot of connections between a lot of these different techniques or approaches. All right, happy versus unhappy path. I know as business analysts, we like to think happy path, but we gotta acknowledge the unhappy path always does exist, and we usually have to do something about it. So the little chart on the left, I believe that's one of the other early techniques I learned when I became a BA. I think it's called an activity diagram. It's been a while since my original training, and I don't use this one as often, but it's still very helpful to kind of lay out what's going on. So you kind of have a start point, and then you go through and do a validation. Do they have credentials that are valid or not? In the happy path, everything's good. It flows right through. They get logged right in. In the unhappy path, they, don't put something in wrong, right? They fat finger it or they can't remember. And so then you have to provide them with a failure path where they can figure out how to get their password so they can try it again. So those could be separate stories. Next one is another one. Hopefully everybody's familiar with the CRUD acronym. It's create, read, update, delete. So this is another really good way to just logically approach splitting stories. I will say that a lot of times as I've used this particular splitting approach, that the developers sometimes prefer it if you have the create and the edit, or those be, or the update kind of be one story because they're almost the same. There's just some little nuances. Maybe it's the exact same screen. There's just a couple things that are different, the same set of code. So sometimes it's better to have those be combined, but definitely like the ability to read something, read it only, and then delete it. Those would be other good operations that you could split your story by. All right, acceptance criteria. So I love acceptance criteria, and I think they usually provide clues to you as to when you probably ought to split your user stories. So this is an actual real example. I was a consultant for the last decade, and one of my clients, we were building them a mobile app, and the product owner had this requirement to basically be able to send notifications of news in the industry, but for this fake example, it's like, I want to send, all my subscribers news about new recipes, blah, 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 etc. So in my real world example, these are kind of the like bulleted list of acceptance criteria we started to gather. And as we started going through it, we're like, wait a minute, this is really big. Like, this isn't a small thing. We need to actually take each of these acceptance criteria and turn them into their own story. It was almost like an app within an app building this piece. So it was a big clue that we really underestimated what this was going to take. And it ended up, becoming a much bigger effort than we originally thought. So when you start to see lots and lots of acceptance criteria and the scenarios just keep going and going, if you're maybe using the, given, when, then, the gherkin, like the more scenarios you get, the more it is a clue that you probably need to split it up. All right, business rules. Everybody loves business rules. It's one of our favorite BABOK techniques, right? Basically, these are self-imposed constraints organizations put on themselves to basically protect themselves. In some cases, they don't want to break the law. They want to, adhere to the rules, and maybe just things to protect themselves. So in this example, I want to add maybe wine pairings to recipes in my app, but I know I don't want young people to be looking for, wine in my app. I only want people who are old enough to have alcoholic beverages. So maybe I have a business rule that says you have to be 21 or older to be able to view the alcoholic beverages in the app. Maybe I think like certain social media sites, for example, you can't join until you're like at least 13. I think Facebook might have that business rule. Others, usually these tend to be more at an organizational level. They're not per se your actual business requirements. These are things you will discover as your listing requirements, but typically they apply more overall to a whole entire effort or an organization versus a particular thing that you're trying to do. But you would capture this and be able to apply it to split stories. So in this one, I've got, an underage user, they can only see food, they don't get any temptation from alcoholic suggestions. And then your adult user can see the pairings because they want to know, what goes best with the recipe they're trying to make. All right, the next one is data variations. So I've also used this one in real world, apps that I've been a BA on to help build. In my fake example, again, coming back to I want to have wine pairings. So maybe I want different ways of, pairing those wines. So maybe it's by the type of entree or by the type of country or the grape varietal or any other, different variation that I could think of. You could split those out so that they could be done independently, individually, instead of all at once. Thereby kind of reducing the complexity. All right, spikes. If you haven't heard of this term, let me know. Spikes are something I'm not a huge fan of, but sometimes, again, sort of like the technical stories I'm not a fan of, spikes are something that usually happens when you don't know something. You are starting down a path, you realize that you need more information, you need to do research. You really it's a big bad thing you've never done before, and you just need to get some time. Maybe you time box it so you can explore what it's about and then come back with recommendations. And really, it's just an opportunity to just take something, maybe just a part of another story, right? That had a thing in it that you didn't think you could do. You'd break that out into a spike, and then you do your investigation, and again, come back with the recommendations or the findings in the future so that a decision can be made about, where to go next. Again, use these very sparingly, in my opinion, make it the exception, not the rule, and definitely not a habit. If you see a lot of spikes, you might have problems. All right, split conditions. So this one is kind of looking for some keywords like I want this, then I want this, and I want this. So you're kind of looking for those joining words that kind of make it a combination story, but you can make it more atomic. So in this example, as a food lover, I want to search the recipes by category. Then I want to view the details of a particular recipe, and then I want to print it so that I can actually make it. So you'd split that out by each of those basically activities that they're doing. I really encourage you to watch out for those keywords. People tend to try to want to fit a lot into a story, but stories, again, should be as atomic as possible and independent, meet that INVEST criteria. All right, who loves ambiguous words, BAs? Nobody. We don't like those ambiguous words. They're not very good, right? They don't specifically tell us anything. So in this example, I have a story that's to share recipes. Oh, well, what does share mean exactly? And I know this is almost breaking a little bit of another BA rule, which is not to do a solution inside of your user story, but I think in this particular example, it makes sense because it is a particular delivery channel that you want to use for splitting out the story. So to share, you could do it by email, social media, text message. And so basically you're splitting it out by each of those different delivery channels because you're going to have different goals on, why you want to share them in each particular venue. All right, error handling and logic. So again, this kind of ties back into happy path, right? Sometimes you might just say, we're going to just go through this. We're going to assume everything's going to go perfectly. We're not going to handle the errors right now. We're just going to ignore them if they happen, and we're going to move on. But you really don't want to do that because that's not a good user experience, right? Nobody wants to have errors happening and then have no clue that they're happening or what to do about it, right? So in this case, initially you could just say, something goes wrong, the people just stay on the screen, nothing, errors out, but at least they could try again. Then the next one would be if there's errors found, you want to show them a message, right? Something did go wrong, give them something, meaningful that they can use to figure out that there's a problem. And particularly on like mobile apps, so, and again, this is all coming from my real world experience. There was an app that I was building for a company, and they had a requirement that the app had to work when it was not connected to the internet. So, or that, something would indicate to the person that they might not have problems if they're not on the internet. So if they lost their connection, we would show them an error so that they would know that they need to connect to Wi-Fi or whatever it might be to use the app. So you can handle the errors after the fact. Then there's interface variations. So this one is a story to print the recipes. So maybe I want to just have a quick and dirty black and white version that has no pictures or anything. I just print it out, it's got the text on it, and I can just, use it. Or maybe I want a color version. I want to have pictures that have color photos of the stuff I'm trying to make. I personally hate a cookbook that doesn't have pictures of the recipe finished that I'm trying to make because I want to know what it's supposed to look like, right? And I want to make it as pretty as I can. Yes, Robert.
Monterius has an outstanding question. Then I have one.
Oh, okay. Who's first?
I did already ask it. I guess I did kind of feel like maybe it wasn't as, or maybe I should ask it a little bit differently. So I was wondering specifically, like when I am gathering the information from the end user, like what methods do you feel that a developer should utilize? Unless it's just these methods that you're displaying here, in order to gather that information properly instead of it coming from their perspective. Because my understanding at this time is that if I gather that information, I can only communicate it from that perspective. That's the only reason why. Yeah.
So I think this is kind of going back to some older school business analysis techniques, but like try creating a list of actors. who are all the actors, the roles, the different kinds of people that will be using your app, and make a list of those actors, and then maybe use case diagramming. I don't love traditional use cases per se for their format and a lot of reasons, but I do love a good use case diagram. It's a visual way to figure out who are the users, what are they coming from, what are they trying to do, what are they trying to accomplish. So I would suggest using a use case diagramming technique for that. And maybe personas as well. Those are like fake people, fake users. Sometimes, you might have an advanced user who knows everything about a system. You might have a newbie user. You might have different, demographics that you care about. So consider using personas as well. Those are another good user-focused technique. All right, back to Bob.
So like I want to make sure that I'm understanding. You're talking about making sure that format is presented to you in that structure of the actors.
No, that you could facilitate that, elicit that. You work with your stakeholders and say, who are all the users? What are all their different capabilities? What are all their different attributes? If you're going to use personas, you want to get, some representation of different types of users that you'll want to maybe write your user stories from different perspectives. Or going back to like the first one on here, which is the roles and responsibilities. That's going to help you logically approach it by figuring out who are all the users right up front, and then you can make sure you're accounting for all the different things all the different users need to be able to do. Does that make sense?
So yeah, that does make sense. It's just I don't know, maybe it's my language, maybe I'm communicating it poorly. I was trying to make sure that I didn't, once I gathered information, how I gathered it, that I didn't present it in a way from my perspective. So I was kind of feeling that some developers in your past as you've worked with have presented information to you from their perspective. Yep. And so what I was trying to figure out what that mistake was specifically, like format wise or communication wise.
Yep.
And how would you want that gathered?
Right.
So that's what I was asking, is that, do you want the actors and the personas, is that the format you want to be presented to you? I'm just trying to, because you got one of user experience, I'm thinking. Yeah.
I'm just giving you the consultant answer, which is it depends. It depends what it's for, right? Sometimes there are really, truly legitimate technical stories that need to happen. Like maybe you need to set up a database before you can put any data in it, and you already kind of know the structure of it, but it has to be done before you can do anything. That's not in and of itself going to be valuable to your product owners or your users, but your developers might be like, yeah, I really need to get this set up first before I can do anything. And in that case, it would just be a technical story that would be for them to do that. It's more like a task than a story though. And again, those should be, I would always challenge a developer not to do that, but to find a way to take that request or that need and to put it, again, thinking back to slicing the cake, making sure you're taking that thin vertical slice through all the layers. And I've seen this with even like senior, like seasoned, like very experienced developers. They tend to slide back into, we need to have all this schema defined at the very beginning, like of a project. Not if you're in Agile, you don't. You need to, if you have to build a database, sure. But if you're just trying to get one field on a screen coming out of that database, you can just do that one little itty bitty piece and you'll deliver value. But will there be refactoring later and shaping and reshaping of that database and its design? Yes, there will be. But always challenge those when they come up, I would say.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, good questions.
Well, you mostly just answered my question. B, I will say that you always want to communicate and iterate to make sure everyone is understood. None of this stuff needs to be one shot. You throw it over the transom, expect perfect understanding without friction and without review. It's a very human and very interpersonal ongoing process. You're always talking, just having this conversation right now is very helpful. clears a lot of things up for my understanding of where you're coming from. One of the what I was going to ask is, do we ever break things down lower than user story? And the answer you just said is yes, because then you had to form a task to developers
Correct.
to
Correct.
actually do all the technical things to
Yes.
support the story.
Exactly.
So-
Yes. So user stories are really about the who, the what, and the why. And then it's the developer's job to take that and figure out the how. So a user story along with its acceptance criteria, and hopefully you have a definition of ready for what that looks like as a fully fleshed out and ready to develop story that gets, shared with your development team, and then they figure out what are all the technical tasks they need to accomplish this story, and they'll break those out, and that's definitely at a more granular level. But usually, your user acceptance or your acceptance criteria is a good way to kind of help them figure that out. But they might have questions, you might need to make changes. Sometimes they'll look at it and they'll say, that doesn't make any sense. For these technical reasons, this should still be one story. So you might have split it thinking they were doing a good thing, but sometimes they might want it as one story because there's technical reasons behind it that you aren't aware of as a business analyst, which is totally fine. You can then recombine the story, no problem. And like you said, Bob, it should be very iterative.
Rachel,
All
we've
right.
got a few more questions.
Sure.
Leanne?
This is great. Love it.
Hi, Rachel. Can you share this experience? In what circumstances you need to elicit information from developers? Acceptance, user
they're part of the
acceptance?
team, right? So on a Scrum or Agile team, they're part of the team, and it's one thing to go out and only talk to your product owner and the stakeholders, the subject matter experts, but there are technical considerations, and guess what? Your developers are also stakeholders. So you ought to include them in some of the conversations, and they may have input as to maybe why something should be split differently. Like maybe they have insight in how the code exists and why things should maybe be done from a slightly different approach. So they're stakeholders too, I guess would just be my main answer, but I still wouldn't call them users. They're not the users of the system. So always keep that in mind, that you still, even though what they say you need to know about, you should still almost always try to come at it from a customer lens. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Any other questions?
Last question is in the chat. In case you have a team with specialized developers, for example, mobile, backend, UI, database, and the story you're creating has a little bit of everything, how would you split the story so that a single person can work on the story, but not 4 different people?
Oh, I think that's a really good question, and I think that that's a legitimate problem. So I think on an Agile team, you can have areas of specialty, but you should still be a T-shaped learner. And you should, although you might be a mobile expert, that's your primary skill set, you should be able to cross-train other skills. So I would like to see more generalists on a team than specialists. The more that people can share their knowledge with one another, the more valuable they're all going to be. That way you're not going to be blocked by someone because they're the only one who can do this particular thing. I would say more pair programming, teaming people up to cross-train one another. The more they can all be, whole developers, not just specialists, the better off you're going to be as a team. And I have run into this, and it is a problem. And as I've also been an Agile coach in some of my consulting roles, and so that's usually my advice: is you need to not have so much specialization. And I think, there's also lots of debates about business analysts and whether you should specialize in something or not. And it is interesting, that the IIBA has added, these different various specialized, focuses. So in addition to the CBAP, I have the AAC and I also have the CPOA. So I've chosen more of the product focus, but I think it's good to have a specialization, but be flexible, learn new things. The more you know, the more skills and talents that you have that you can contribute, the better your team's going to be. So that's another really great question.
All right.
I can share my experience
Yeah, please
with
do.
this. Basically, I used like two ways of doing this. One is then when you have a user story and it involves like 2 or 3 people working together, or like sequentially. So you can just make the backend developer like let's say his effort is 2 days, and then front-end developer takes his part in another 3 days. And so you can like hand so one team member hands out the user story to another team member in one sprint, and then until the end of the sprint it is completed, right?
Right.
Another way is that you have a user story and you have like subtasks. Let's say one
Yep.
for DBA, another for backend developer, and another for UI developer. So this is just another way of doing this.
Yeah, yeah, and it's going to depend again on the team, their willingness to learn new things, their ability to flex. You know, because I was a front end developer basically in my previous life, I can get in there and code. Do you really want me to code? Probably not. I'm a little rusty. But if I needed to in a pinch, I could help out, right? There's things I can do as far as quality assurance testing. You know, if I wrote the acceptance criteria, I usually don't want to be the one to test them myself, but I know the most about them, so maybe I can jump in and help with testing. Like, everybody on the team should be willing to do any job that they're capable of, and the more you can cross train and get more generalized versus specialized, the better off you're usually going to be. All right, I think this is the last and the hardest of the common approaches to story splitting, which is every BA's favorite topic, right? Non-functional requirements. These are difficult. These are the hardest ones, in my opinion, to elicit, to define, to nail down with measurements, because usually you need to put a number to them to make them testable. But again, as a reminder for folks, anytime you hear an ility at the end of a word, that's usually a clue that that is a non-functional requirement and that you need to elicit something about it. And these are hard. I learned this lesson the hard way, I'll be honest. Again, I was working in a retail organization building a mobile shopping app. I thought I nailed my requirements, they're great. And then, oh, well, technically, the solution they built met my requirements because I didn't have any performance requirements that said it needed to load quickly. It was like spinning and spinning and spinning this mobile app. And in mobile apps, you cannot have that happen. You cannot have a lag time. You cannot have a long wait for people. They're too impatient. They're going to delete your app and you'll never get a chance again. So, you need to be able to understand which of there's like probably 100 different types of non-functional requirements. In fact, on my website, I have a PDF you can download that's got a list of 100 different types of non-functional requirements you could elicit. They're not all going to apply to every project, so you have to be careful. These are time consuming and again, really hard to get at, but there are ones that are super important. Security is one that really always comes to mind. Anything that's, sensitive, your PII, private information that you don't want to share, things like that. Laws. I once also built a mobile app for a company out of the UK, and their laws are very much more strict than in the United States. And so you have to care about those things more. So pay attention to those. There's lots of different ways you can handle non-functional requirements in an Agile context. Sometimes you can bake them in as acceptance criteria. Sometimes you can make them more overall requirements for the whole entire effort. Sometimes you can make it its own like separate bucket of requirements that you handle independently. It doesn't really totally matter how or where you do it as long as it gets done somewhere. It's probably more a matter of preference between you and your team. but don't ignore if non-functional requirements or you'll make the same mistake that I did and learn it the hard way, which I don't want for anybody. All right, moving on. So this is the third part. So we have the common ones, which we just covered, and the last part here is the more evolutionary story splitting methods. So these are a little more advanced, I would say, where you're usually starting from a place of simplicity, very basic, and then elaborating on and making them more complex. So there are 8 of these ones. All right, the first one is 0, 1, many. So this is looking at a story and saying, well, you know, we're going to look at a list of recipes. Initially, there's not going to maybe be anything in there. You know, there's just nothing there. There's no recipes. There's none. What happens when you add 1? Then you'll see 1, and then you'll see many. So it's just a way to kind of look at what would happen if nothing is there, and then just keep iterating on that. The next one, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a huge fan of this splitting method, but I did have to use it in a real world context. We had actual separate teams that were building the same exact functionality for Apple devices, Android devices, and Windows devices. And it was pretty awful, honestly. I don't recommend it. And technology has evolved dramatically since I worked on that particular project, where you can generally use, you know, you can code it using the tools available now for 80% that would work across all the different devices, and then you only would have to customize 20% per device, but there would still be particular things that you can maybe do on one device that you can't do on another that you would want to take advantage of. So this is a way to approach it. You know, you could do it by operating system, by actual like device. You could, yeah. Again, not my favorite, but sometimes it's necessary. All right, next one is simple to complex. So starting out with a very, very basic story, you know, I just want to see a list of recipes in alphabetical order so I can see what's included. And then you would add on another layer, which should be, in addition to the title, I want to see a description so I can have a better idea of what's in it. And then you would add on, say, the ingredients, and then you could add on the instructions. So you could do this just sort of incrementally, one piece at a time, and just building from very basic to much more complex. All right, then we've got static versus dynamic. So this is, again, another real example from my career, building an app, and we had data, we just couldn't connect to it yet, but we were able to export a basic snapshot of that data at a point in time that we were able to load into the system. We could use it, but it wasn't like the actual real dynamic changing data, but it was enough to get us going so we could continue with development, because it had been blocking us. Like, we can't get connected, we have no data. Well, we just exported a copy of the data as it existed. We brought it into the system, we did what we had to do, and when we could eventually connect, and this was more of a technical constraint, then basically we wiped out the data that we had that was static and replaced it with a dynamic fed system. So yeah, so if you can wait, you don't have to have the real stuff to start with. You can start with a point in time. Another one would be starting with manual processes and then adding automations. So in this example, this was, you know, we had this data, we could push a button that a person would have to do to get the data into the system, but automating it was going to be a major effort. So we didn't want to necessarily do that right up front. So as part of like an MVP, we wanted to just make sure that it worked, and we can circle back later and add in automating how that data would flow into the system, like using a batch approach.
Rachel, talk for just a minute about MVP. Some people may not be familiar with that.
Oh, sure. MVP is minimal viable product. So that's starting with actually, that's kind of, I'm going to get there. If you'll wait just a minute, it's like I think it's the last slide. So I'll cover that one in just a minute. We're almost there. The next one here is low then high fidelity. So low fidelity would be something really like you drew it on a napkin or a whiteboard, and it's very, very rough. Think rough draft, very rough draft. And then you start to fill in the layers, right? So in this example, you know, you're going to start out with, you know, very, like I said, I just love this visual because it really kind of explains it better than I can with words. But you're starting out and then you're saying, yeah, that's okay, but let's, like, I don't like her hand up there, let's move that down. And then you start to add in some color and some more color, and then eventually you get a final refined version. And this is really helpful when you're in the early stages to get feedback as soon as possible on a concept, and usually not having things like branding, applied colors, fonts, things like that is going to help your stakeholders focus more on the functionality of what it's actually doing versus how it looks. Usually in the many projects I've worked on, I've worked with UX folks, and they call it putting lipstick on it at the end, right? So you're basically building out a wireframe, you're putting on the flesh, and then eventually you're going to make it really pretty. So different ways to approach stories from that perspective as well. And then, ooh, almost there, fake then real data. So this is very similar to the one before where you were taking static then dynamic. This is where you can't even get any data. You just have to fake it till you make it. So you stub something out. It's going to have the shape of the data that you want it to be in the future, but it's not real. Nothing is real about it. It's not coming from a real source. You're just coming up with something that you can live with temporarily until you can get the real data. So I've run into that situation, very slightly different from the prior example, but also another real thing you could run into. All right, this is the last one, I think. So a minimal viable product. So again, you want to get the most basic product that you can that has the key things that you need, but it's not going to be a final product, right? It's just the first pass. In this little example, you're trying to create something that will get you from point A to point B. Okay, the first one's very like, it's a board with some wheels, and that, oh, okay, we learned that it's not very stable. We want to add on to that so we have a way to kind of control it. And then you just keep iterating on it until you reach, a place of maturity. But MVPs are a way to get something out there so you can start gathering feedback as soon as possible. But each of your user stories would split out, and it's as you learn new things, right? You might start out with the vision of the end in mind, right? The whole entire car, but you're not going to get to that in one single sprint. So you start with the components and then you build upon them incrementally. And that is the end. I know that was a lot. That was 27 different approaches to splitting user stories. So I'm open to any more questions.
One of the biggest dilemmas that organizations seem to have is, do they include testing in their iteration? Is it part of?
Oh, yes, that's a great one.
Agile
Yeah.
talks about delivery, and you can't deliver without testing. So
This is an absolutely true statement, and I've run into this so many times, I can't even tell you how many times. And sometimes it's really hard to get the testing done within an iteration, and so you end up having that follow in a subsequent sprint, which I can't stand. That is not a good practice. I am a fan of always making your stories small enough that they can be completely done within an iteration, which includes, in my mind, testing. However, that is also dependent upon your team's definition of done. So definition of done is about the increment that you're building and what that means to be completely ready, and it should be potentially deployable, right, or releasable. I think that includes quality testing, absolutely. That's my opinion. I know it doesn't always in reality end up working out that way. I'm in a really unfortunate program right now that's very much fake agile. So we're working with a vendor and they're leading the show, and we just have to follow what they're doing, and it's pretty horrible. So I'm definitely on board with you that if at all possible, that the testing portion be included in your definition of done. And if it's never going to work for whatever reason, sometimes you have to just deal with that, and your definition of done will be it's, to another state of quality that's probably not where it should be. But yeah, that's a real scenario, real problem in a lot of different organizations.
The reason I brought it up is because when we talk about the size of a user story, we have to include that and we have to really work with the testers, or the last half of the sprint, everybody's kind of looking at them going, okay, it's your turn.
Right.
So
And this is a problem so many companies have. So they still are in a little bit stuck in the waterfall mindset, I would say. And so what they're doing is the developers are basically holding on to their stories, working on a whole bunch of stories at the same time instead of just focusing on like one and getting it across the finish line as soon as possible so that it can move on to a tester. And then they're piling it up, and it's this traditional waterfall problem where everything gets saved up till the very last day, and then the poor QA person only has a day to test, and they never can possibly do a thorough or good enough job in one day for a whole sprint's worth of work, right? So my root cause analysis of this tells me this is a WIP problem. There's too many things in progress at the same time. You should be focusing on the highest priority thing, the very top of the backlog, focusing on it exclusively. If you get bored or you get blocked, that's not an excuse to just move on to the next thing. You should be getting getting your blocker resolved, figuring it out, moving it on, getting it through to the QA people as soon as possible, and hopefully, ideally, incrementally releasing that work to the QA team throughout the sprint so that by the time the sprint ends, everything has been tested, everything is complete, everything meets your definition of done. So that's another tough one.
does anyone else have questions for Rachel?
If not, I'm going to move on to this slide. You guys QR code scan me, find me on LinkedIn. That's actually a link to my blog. I've got my other contact information. I'd love to connect with any of you if any of you ever want feedback on your user stories or just need some guidance. I am more than happy to help.
I adore that. Thank you very much, Rachel.
My
Y'all give
pleasure.
applause on emojis. Let her know appreciate what she's done for us today.
I'm going to stop sharing
Yes,
now.
or on video. You can do it on video too. Okay. Next week, we're going to be meeting with the Tampa Women in Agile and the Agile Product Group out of Tampa Bay. We're going to practice the lean coffee technique, and we're going to be talking about Agile. So I hope you join us then and tell some people about us. We can only do as good as the people that actually attend. Rachel, again, thank you so much. You have good stuff, and I'm sure that we've now have more tools in our toolbox.
I hope so. I wish I had this knowledge when I started in an agile world, because I learned a lot of this the hard way, right? And also there is an art and a science to splitting user stories. I think just even writing a good user story is such a skill. It is deceptively simple. Oh yeah, you just gotta have a user and a this and a that, and it's actually so hard to be good at this. I think it takes years and years of practice, making mistakes, learning from your mistakes, and doing it again. And hopefully you guys have a new way to look at stories and how you might possibly split them for the best outcome.
Right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for showing up and doing a fantastic job. We really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. And we appreciate you guys for attending.
Definitely, especially right now in Florida.
Yep. Those of you who are in Florida, please stay safe. The rest of us, keep thinking about them. I heard that Georgia and Louisiana are having trouble too. So y'all be careful. Meet back here next week. Show some love to the people that are running this thing. It's kind of nice to hear that we are doing a good job. We're
doing a
impacting.
great job. Yeah.
So
Thanks again.
You.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.